Hey, what's up guys? It's Rick with the Digital Divide. Today I want to talk about the Atari Jaguar. This is officially the last console that Atari ever produced, and one of the very few consoles ever released that I've never owned in any capacity. I always was curious about the console. I remember back when I was a kid and KB Toy Store was going out of business, they had a stack of these for dirt cheap, and I wish I would have picked one up just to mess around with it a bit more and have more exposure to it. But today I want to talk about some of the history. So development of the Jaguar started in the early 1990s by a company called Flare Technology, which focused on development of the system after Atari decided to cancel what was then the Atari Panther console. Now this is a sketch of what the Panther console would have looked like had it ever been released, and Atari actually went so far as to make working production units, as you can see here, of the Panther, but Atari instead chose to focus on the Jaguar. Released in North America in November 1993 at a price of $249.99 under a $500 million manufacturing deal with IBM, the Jaguar was part of the fifth generation of video game consoles. It primarily competed with the 16-bit Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo, and the 32-bit 3DO interactive system that launched the same year. During their initial press conference, they showed some live gameplay of early games that were in development, and this was met with lukewarm reception. A lot of the attendees at the press conference cited the graphics were really subpar for what was considered back then to be a next-generation system. Now, Atari marketed this console as the world's first 64-bit gaming system.
Some of you believe your system is the most advanced in the universe. Let's review the numbers. Sega Genesis is 16 bits. 3DO is 32 bits. The Atari Jaguar is 64 bits. Which is more advanced? Clifford! 16 and 32 are less than 64. So with 64 bits, 3D graphics, real-world animation, and lightning speed that you can only get with Jaguar, which is more advanced? Clifford!
Can you repeat the question?
Jaguar! Jaguar! Jaguar!
In reality, the Jaguar sported two custom processors nicknamed Tom and Jerry, in addition to a Motorola 68000 CPU, but Tom and Jerry were both based on 32-bit RISC architecture and not 64-bit at all, as Atari claimed. The system also featured 2 megabytes of RAM, and the cartridges could be up to 6 megabytes in total size. So all of the graphical effects are software-based. The Tom chip ran at 26.59 megahertz, the Jerry chip ran at 26.59 megahertz, and it did have 16-bit stereo audio as well. The Atari Jaguar launched with 4 games. Those games were Trevor McFur in the Crescent Galaxy, Raiden, Dino Dudes, and Cybermorph, which was actually a pack-in game that was included with the Atari Jaguar. The Jaguar released some pretty decent 2D games. Atari Kart was its answer to Mario Kart, and it had some neat scaling effects, but these effects are not a huge leap over what we would see in Mario Kart for the Super Nintendo, for example, with the sprite-based graphics and scaling techniques that they used. There was also games like Zool 2, which featured really fast scrolling and smooth platforming, but again, it's not unlike something we would see in, say, Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis. When you compared the 2D capabilities of the Jaguar against the PlayStation, it's pretty favorable. They're both very comparable, and it's clear that the Jaguar was good at 2D graphics, but when it came to 3D graphics, it was a completely different story. We're looking at Iron Soldier now. You can see that all the polygonal-based graphics are just flat, shaded polygons. They're almost completely devoid of any textures. If we look over at Cybermorph, which was the pack-in game for the system, this really is a good example of that, where all the texture work is missing on the mountains here. It's just flat shaded garage shading, and it looks horrible, and the frame rate is incredibly low on top of that. There were some exceptions, though. If we jump over to Tempest 2000, this game took better advantage of the Jaguar hardware with some really cool 2D scaling effects in addition to 3D elements, all running at a pretty good frame rate. So there were exceptions, but they were few and far between. Now, let's talk about this controller. The Atari Jaguar controller is one of the worst I have ever handled in my life. There are far too many buttons on this thing. The D-pad positioning is super awkward, as are the C, B, and A buttons. I'm just not a fan. The controller was designed to be able to put these custom stickers or pads on top of the controller, and they were game specific, and each one would have a different function to tell you what controls what, but in practice it was just too much, and the positioning of the controller was just really uncomfortable and counterintuitive in my opinion. Now, Atari attempted to extend the lifespan of the system with the Atari Jaguar CD add-on, but it failed to take off. There were some decent games released for it. One good example is Primal Rage. This was a port of the arcade version of the game, and a pretty decent one at that. With the release of the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation in 1995, sales of the Jaguar continued to fall. It sold no more than 150,000 units before it was discontinued in 1996, making it one of the worst-selling consoles of all time. The commercial failure of the Jaguar prompted Atari to leave the console market entirely. As a result, a lot of retailers advertised the Jaguar at bargain bin prices towards the end of its life cycle just to get rid of inventory.
A 64-bit Jaguar system for $149.
Atari Jaguar 64-bit, $149.
Knock it off!
So the Jaguar was considered a colossal failure, but there were a few standout titles. The system did get a decent port of Doom. It also had Aliens vs. Predator, which many consider to be the best game on the system. So it's not completely without merit, but I think the Jaguar really suffered due to a lack of software support, hardware that was just underpowered when compared to the PlayStation and Sega Saturn that would launch shortly thereafter. That's going to do it for me today, guys. If you have an idea for another retrospective for me to do, just leave a comment below and I'm more than happy to make a video on it. As always, thanks for watching.